The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds, broken the backs of countless civilizations, and remade the stars in its image. When they first encountered humans, they saw nothing but frailty, soft-bodied creatures who relied too much on technology, who lacked the hardened exoskeletons, natural weaponry, or sheer genetic advantages that defined the Empire's elite warrior species. To them, humanity was little more than a primitive anomaly, a species unworthy of real fear. That was before Captain Jack Callahan and his men proved them wrong. The operation had been straightforward, a reconnaissance mission deep within Imperial space, a chance to gather intelligence on their fleet movements. Callahan and his team, 6 battle-hardened Americans, each one a master of unconventional warfare, had slipped onto the mining colony of Dras Prime under the cover of a passing freighter. It should have been easy, but nothing ever went as planned. They had barely stepped off the transport when the ambush came. Imperial shock troopers, hulking, insectoid brutes in matte black armor, descended upon them in waves. Callahan's men fought back, ducking behind cargo containers, their suppressed rifles spitting tungsten rounds into chitin-plated warriors. Gunnery Sergeant Victor Kane, the team's heavy weapons specialist, took down 3 before a plasma bolt punched through his shoulder, sending him sprawling. Sam Walker, their tech expert, tried scrambling the enemy's comms, but was caught in a concussive blast, his body thrown like a rag doll. Callahan had taken out 5 of the bastards before a pulse grenade left his ears ringing and his limbs unresponsive. He had only a moment to register the blurred shapes of his remaining men, bound and dragged away, before everything went black. He woke up in chains. The Empire did not bother with formalities. Their captors paraded them through a city of towering spires and sprawling industrial complexes, the alien crowd hissing and chittering in amusement. The human prisoners were shackled together, their uniforms torn, faces bloodied. Callahan caught Kane's eye. His sergeant's face was locked in a silent snarl, defiant even in restraint. They were marched into a high-walled compound, the Imperial officer in charge striding ahead with a casual arrogance that made Callahan's teeth clench. The creature was tall, its armor gleaming obsidian, its mandibles clicking in a way that might have been amusement. "You are fortunate," the alien said, voice metallic through its translation unit. "Others like you have been executed for daring to step where they do not belong." It turned, its segmented eyes locking onto Callahan. "But our Emperor is curious. He wonders what drives your kind to challenge us. What gives you the arrogance to think you can wage war against the inevitable?" Callahan spat blood onto the ground. "Maybe we just don't like bullies." The alien tilted its head before nodding to its guards. "You will serve the Empire now." Their new home was a prison world, a fortress built into the jagged cliffs of a barren wasteland. The air was thick with the scent of metal and sulfur, and the sky was a churning storm of gray and orange. Humans were not the only prisoners here. Beasts from a dozen different worlds slaved under the Empire's watchful eye, building weapons and warships, feeding the insatiable machine of conquest. Callahan and his men were thrown into the gladiatorial pits on their first day. The Empire relished in spectacle, and what better way to entertain their warriors than by forcing prisoners to fight for survival? The first match was a demonstration. A captured warrior of the Trulcan species, his forearms bound, was thrown into the arena with one of the Empire's elite enforcers. The fight lasted less than a minute. The enforcer toyed with his prey, raking serrated claws across the Trulcan's torso before ending it with a brutal strike to the skull. The crowd roared in approval. Then it was Callahan's turn. The guard shoved him into the pit, his wrists unbound but his body aching from days of deprivation. Across from him, a 7-foot-tall enforcer raised a plasma-edged spear, clicking its mandibles in challenge. Callahan didn't wait. He exploded into motion, ducking low as the alien lunged. The spear's edge sliced air where his head had been a moment before. Callahan pivoted, using his momentum to drive an elbow into the alien's side. The enforcer barely flinched. A backhand sent him sprawling. The crowd laughed, jeering in a dozen different languages. The enforcer stepped forward, raising its spear for a finishing blow. Callahan rolled, snatching a fallen piece of broken armor from the blood-soaked sand. As the spear came down, he twisted, slamming the jagged metal into the enforcer's exposed knee joint. A shriek of pain tore through the arena. Callahan was on his feet in an instant, grabbing the alien's wrist, forcing the spear aside, and driving a savage punch into its throat. The laughter stopped. The enforcer collapsed, choking on its own mandibles. Callahan stood over the body, chest heaving, eyes locked onto the Imperial Overseer watching from the balcony above. He bared his teeth in a humorless grin. The Empire had made a mistake. They thought humans were weak, that they would break under pressure, that they would accept their fate. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The guards dragged Callahan back to the holding cells, his body bruised but his mind sharper than ever. The other prisoners watched him differently now. The spectacle in the arena had spread through the compound like wildfire. A human had survived his first match, no more than that. He had won. The Empire expected obedience, fear, submission. But Callahan had seen something deeper in the way the alien overseers watched him now. Uncertainty. A crack in their absolute control. He was going to break it wide open. Kane and Walker were waiting when the guards threw him into their shared cell. Kane had already fashioned a makeshift sling for his injured arm, his face twisted in barely contained rage. "You okay, Cap?" Walker asked, voice low. Callahan sat up, flexing his fingers. "Yeah, better than that bastard in the pit." Kane grunted. "Damn right. I bet they thought you'd roll over and die." He spat to the side. "Idiots." Walker's eyes flickered toward the guards stationed outside the cell door. "They're watching us closer now." "Good," Callahan said. "Let them." For 3 days they observed. The guards ran their schedules like clockwork, rotating every 8 hours, always the same routes. The overseers rarely set foot inside the deeper sections of the prison unless something demanded their attention. That was their first mistake. On the 4th day, Callahan and his men were assigned to work detail in the lower foundries, breaking down scrap for weapons manufacturing. That was when he met the others. Scattered through the compound, lost among the thousands of prisoners, were more Americans. A Marine Force recon scout named Harris, a Navy pilot called Rourke, a demolitions expert, Ramirez, whose arms were covered in crude scars from past fights. "We were part of a strike force," Harris explained, voice hushed as he fed molten ore into the smelting vats. "Got ambushed near the Tau Ceti border. Some of us made it to escape pods. The rest, he didn't need to finish." Rourke shook his head. "They treat us like we're animals. I've seen them break warriors from species 10 times stronger than us. But you," he smirked at Callahan, "you got them spooked, Captain." Callahan glanced at the guards patrolling the catwalks above. "Then let's make him scared for real." They got to work. The Empire underestimated human adaptability. That was their second mistake. Callahan and his men started small, testing weaknesses, mapping corridors, marking blind spots. Kane bribed a desperate guard with food rations to smuggle a length of industrial cable into their barracks. Walker dismantled scrap electronics, piecing together a crude transmitter. Every night, they passed information, refining their plan. The Empire's automated security relied on biometric scans, but Walker figured out how to override the system with stolen access chips. Ramirez and Harris found the armory's ventilation shafts, barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. They would need a distraction. A riot. something big enough to throw the entire compound into chaos. Callahan got his answer in the pits. The Empire had a special punishment for prisoners who refused to fight. Execution by Behemoth. A towering brute of muscle and armor, enhanced with cybernetics. Its only purpose was to slaughter. The overseers called it entertainment. Callahan called it an opportunity. The morning of the execution, the compound was packed with guards, soldiers, and officials. The perfect audience. As the prisoner, a skeletal, half-starved alien, was thrown into the pit, the behemoth lumbered forward, its mechanical limbs hissing with pressure vents. Then the explosion hit. Walker's device, wired to a maintenance tunnel beneath the arena, sent a shockwave through the ground. The blast knocked spectators from their perches, sent guards sprawling. Smoke and dust filled the air. Callahan and his men were already moving. Kane took down the first guard, slamming his shackles around the alien's throat and twisting until he heard the crunch. Harris yanked a plasma rifle from another and fired, the bolt slamming into a watchtower. The crowd panicked. Prisoners surged forward, overwhelming their captors in the confusion. The behemoth, disoriented by the explosion, turned on its handlers, swatting them aside like insects. Callahan led his team through the chaos, weaving past brawling prisoners and panicked guards. They reached the armory. Ramirez slipped through the vents and unlocked the doors from inside. The cache was small, mostly energy rifles, blunt weapons, and a handful of pulse grenades, but it was enough. By the time the guards regrouped, the prisoners were armed. The battle raged for hours. Callahan and his men fought like ghosts, moving through the smoke, striking from the shadows. Kane manned a stolen turret, cutting down enemy reinforcements. Harris led a squad through the barracks, freeing more prisoners. Walker hacked into the facility's mainframe, overriding the launch controls for the docking bay. They had their exit. A stolen Corvette sat waiting, its system still hot from recent use. The last hurdle was getting past the planetary blockade. Imperial warships orbited above, their scanners primed for unauthorized departures. Walker grinned. Good thing I planned for that. The transmission they'd rigged earlier wasn't just a distress signal. It was a ghost signature, feeding false data into the Imperial fleet's security grid. As far as the blockade was concerned, the Corvette was just another authorized vessel. The ship roared to life. Ramirez and Kane manned the turrets, cutting down pursuing fighters as Callahan took the helm. The sky opened up before them, the vast darkness of space a promise of freedom. As the Corvette punched through the blockade, Callahan exhaled. They had done it, but the war was just beginning. The Corvette shuddered as it broke through the final layers of the blockade, alarms wailing across the cockpit. Callahan gripped the controls, knuckles white. Behind him, Walker was frantically inputting countermeasures, trying to keep the ship's stolen transponder from being flagged by the Imperial fleet. They're scrambling interceptors, Walker warned, sweat beading on his brow. They're running our ID through deeper security layers. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they figure out we're not one of theirs. Kane swung into the co-pilot's seat, his injured arm strapped to his chest. Then let's make those 2 minutes count. Callahan didn't need to be told twice. He banked the ship hard, cutting through an asteroid field that drifted along the system's outer rim. Plasma fire streaked past the hull as the first wave of interceptors closed in. Ramirez and Harris manned the ship's turrets, firing off quick bursts of energy that clipped the enemy fighters' wings, but didn't slow them down. They're too damn fast, Ramirez cursed. Callahan's mind worked at lightning speed, assessing their dwindling options. They couldn't outrun the interceptors indefinitely, and once the Imperial fleet realized they had escapees, the entire sector would be locked down. They needed a way to disappear. Walker's fingers danced over the control panel. There's a derelict station about 30,000 clicks from here. Old trade hub, Imperials abandoned it years ago. If we can lose, in the wreckage. Callahan was already adjusting course. Punching it, the Corvette lurched forward, engines flaring as they dove toward the drifting remains of the station. Half the structure was torn apart, massive chunks of metal floating in slow orbit around the central core. The perfect place to vanish. As they neared, Callahan killed the ship's main thrusters, letting momentum carry them forward. The moment they crossed into the wreckage field, he cut the engines completely. Silence. Outside, the Imperial interceptors streaked past, scanning the wreckage, searching. Walker held his breath. Then, one by one, the fighters peeled away. Callahan exhaled. We're clear. For now. He turned in his seat, scanning the faces of his team. They had won a battle, but the war was still waiting. They needed a plan. For 3 days, they hid within the ruins of the station, making repairs, gathering intelligence, and reaching out to whatever remnants of humanity still existed in the void. Messages came in sporadically, coded transmissions from resistance cells, whispers of other survivors. That was how they found Rourke. The former Navy pilot had been holed up in a hidden outpost on the outer rim, salvaging wrecks and running supplies for a growing underground movement. When Callahan's team arrived, Rourke greeted them with a lopsided grin and a bottle of contraband whiskey. "Damn good to see some real fighters," he said, slapping Callahan on the back. "Most of the folks out here, they're scared, scattered. But you," he let out a low whistle, "you just humiliated the biggest empire in the galaxy. People are paying attention." Callahan took a slow sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle in his chest. "We're not here to be heroes. We're here to fight." Rourke's grin widened. "Same thing, ain't it?" The underground network was larger than Callahan had expected. Engineers, smugglers, soldiers, Americans who had refused to bow, who had found ways to fight back, even in the shadows. What they lacked was coordination, firepower, a real strategy. That was where Callahan came in. Harris spread a series of stolen Imperial star charts across the table, tracing his finger along key supply routes. The Empire isn't invincible. They move resources through designated hyperspace corridors. Heavily guarded. Yeah, but predictable. Ramirez leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "You hit their supply chains, you choke him out." Rourke nodded. "We've been doing it piecemeal. Sniping convoys where we can. But a full-scale assault." He whistled again. That'd send a message. Callahan glanced at Walker, who was already tapping away at his portable console. "How much firepower can we scrape together?" Walker smirked. "Enough. They spent the next week preparing. Pilots were trained, ships retrofitted, weapons scavenged and modified. The Empire relied on overwhelming force, but they had grown complacent. They didn't expect humans to strike where it hurt most." Callahan led the assault personally. The convoy they targeted was carrying fuel and weapons to a forward Imperial garrison, guarded by 2 frigates and a squadron of fighters. The rebels hit them fast and hard. Kane, despite his injuries, took point in a stolen Imperial dropship, broadcasting fake clearance codes until they were in firing range. Then all hell broke loose. Rourke led the first wave, his modified strike fighters darting between the lumbering frigates, peppering them with rapid-fire plasma bursts. Ramirez and Harris focused on the freighters, using ion bombs to disable their engines before they could jump to hyperspace. Callahan's Corvette tore straight through the enemy lines, unleashing a barrage of high-powered disruptor rounds. The first Imperial frigate went up in flames. The second barely had time to reposition before Walker hacked into their comms, flooding their systems with false alerts and blaring emergency sirens into their ears. The Empire had never fought like this before. The battle was over in minutes. The Imperials never stood a chance. When the smoke cleared, The human rebels had captured 3 full-supply freighters, 24 fighters, and an entire stockpile of Imperial weapons. It was a victory, a statement. Word spread fast. Across the Outer Rim, more Americans rose up, joining the fight. Imperial officers whispered of ghosts in the dark, of ships appearing out of nowhere, striking and vanishing before they could retaliate. Callahan and his men had become more than just soldiers. They had become something the Empire feared, and fear was a weapon. The Imperial Admiral stood in the war room, eyes locked on the holographic display of the burning supply convoy. His mandibles twitched in frustration, claws clicking against the polished metal of the table. Across from him, his senior officers shifted uneasily. They strike from the shadows. The Admiral growled. They do not fight with honor. They are vermin. His eyes narrowed as he gestured at the casualty reports. And yet these humans have crippled 3 major supply lines in the last cycle. Tell me, Commander, why are they not dead? The officer hesitated before speaking. They are led by a man named Callahan. His tactics are, he swallowed, unpredictable. The Admiral bared his fangs. Find him. Burn him out. Make an example. Across the void, Callahan and his men were already moving. The latest strike had emboldened the resistance, but it had also drawn more Imperial attention. Patrols doubled. Safe houses were raided. Time was running out. We can't keep playing cat and mouse, Kane said, pacing inside their temporary hideout. They'll grind us down. Callahan stared at the star map, watching the blinking red markers, Imperial outposts, garrisons, and shipyards. Then his eyes settled on one point in particular, the heart of the Empire's supply network. What if we don't run? He said. Walker leaned forward. You got something in mind, Cap. Callahan nodded. We take the fight to them. The plan was madness. A direct assault on an Imperial command station, something no one had ever dared attempt. But if they could pull it off, it would send a message the entire galaxy would hear. Preparation was swift and ruthless. They scavenged every available ship, modified stolen Imperial codes, and assembled strike teams with precision. The attack had to be flawless. They launched under the cover of a solar storm, riding the radiation surge past the Empire's long-range scanners. By the time the station detected them, it was too late. Kane and Ramirez led the first wave, breaching the station's outer defenses with explosive charges. Harris and Walker took control of the security grid, turning the Empire's own turrets against them. Callahan moved through the chaos like a phantom, cutting down enemy officers, hacking into critical systems, and sowing destruction at every turn. By the time reinforcements arrived, the command station was in flames. But the real victory wasn't in the destruction. It was in what they left behind. A single, untraceable transmission, sent across every Imperial frequency. A message, broadcast to the entire galaxy. We are not afraid. You called us cowards. You called us weak. Now you know the truth. The American Boogeyman is real, and we are coming for you. The war had only just begun.